Let me first.
Every time it's a bit of a wild ride, eh? Well, it's still the beginning, you know, it's still for us early days.
It's all good. It's all good. It's part of the fun, right? So first of all, thank you, Tanya, again for inviting us, and thank you to my wonderful colleagues, Carolyn and Alice, for your parts. And I thought it was really nice to hear from Carolyn about the context and why we actually why we are doing this and what our customers care about, and obviously to hear from Alice about why we should care and why it is so important, especially as mica is really surrounding us every day, and the varnish of the car or the cosmetics you showed us, and yeah. So thank you for that. I signed up for the technology part of the session, so trying to make it as digestible as possible to all of you. And I tried to answer already some questions in the chat. I'm really happy about those questions because with Corona, we are just sitting here in our office. So I'm really happy to hear from you. And after my part, we will have the opportunity to answer some of those questions, or hope maybe even all of those questions. Yeah, with a little bit more time. So now I'm trying to share my screen with you. Let me see.
Something is happening.
Nothing is happening?
Something is happening. Yeah, we see it. Yeah.
Okay, wait, let me, sorry, just one.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you seeing the speaker mode or the presenter mode?
It's good. It looks good.
Okay. Okay, great. So we wouldn't be invited to this webinar if we wouldn't use blockchain technology. But blockchain is really only a part of our solution, and the part where all this valuable data we are collecting and analyzing is stored, and to make it immutable and therefore trustworthy to governments and institutions and stakeholders, and also to end customers, as it is in our case with our client Volvo, for example. They want to be able to prove to their end customers that their activities within their supply chain is responsible and sustainable. So we are also, as mentioned, using a number of other technologies to be able to reliably link the digital twin, which has been mentioned, and we are creating at the source, to the actual flow of material until it reaches its final assembly, as you can see here. So let's start from the beginning, and in this case, that is the mine site. So you might have like a 20, 30, or 50 kilo bag of raw material, which is brought to a collection point, and that could have been dug by artisanal miners, for example. We are concentrating on artisanal mining today because obviously there's a lot of activities from large-scale mining operations, and that is happening too. But the artisanal mining is really where the concern lies, especially as it involves child labor and other human rights abuses. And these challenges and concerns are really endemic. So it is not only the cobalt or the mica supply chain we are looking at today, it is endemic to supply chains across the world. So if it's forced labor in the cotton supply chain, deforestation when it comes to palm oil growth, that's why also Carolyn showed in the beginning the list of all the resources. What they have in common is are these concerns, and we are able with our solution to technically track and trace those materials, which all change physical and chemical state as they travel along the value chain. So let's go back to the source and the mining site. So the first thing you have to do is create a very, very, very reliable digital twin for the commodity you want to trace. So unlike a banana, for example, which is the same at its source and at the point of its consumption, the breakfast table, for example, other materials that change multiple times physical and chemical state during its journey. So for example, ore goes into sorting, and from sorting into smelting, and from smelting into refining, and then into amalgamation process with other materials, and which then eventually turn into components, and which then will be sub-assemblies for, and then eventually turn into a car. So we are using facial recognition first to understand the actors involved, including the ones who first record those information. And the location, for example, comes from the mobile device that is being used for the activity of recording. But it is not as simple, as we have to deal with concerns around GPS spoofing. So there are possibilities to work around GPS sensing, for example, or GPS location. So there are apps you can download, which will show you at another location where you're actually not. And so we have to deal with that. And yeah, as I said, this is what we do by really paying attention to the first mile. This is where the most concerns lie, especially when it comes to human rights abuses. So we are taking care of the defense, including being very confident that you are inside the geofence we created for the mine site we are working with. And then the composition of the material, which comes from a device which is routinely being used at a mine site, because you want to pay your miners for the good stuff and not just like any stuff they're bringing to the sorting center. And then finally, the attachment of the tag. And our platform is tag agnostic. It generates QR codes with attributes, and those attributes, for example, could be that you can only use those QR codes in the specific mine site, maybe even also in the specific day or week, and maybe even just from this very user who wants to record the first information, however, how granular you want the information to be. So, and also by having those QR codes with attributes, we disable sort of the opportunity for a black market, and the black market for existing bags and tag systems is a common and very significant problem, especially in the copper belt. So that combination of information, so who you are, where you are, and what the material is, and the identity giving to this material and the batch of the material, is the base of the digital twin. So this is what we mean by paying this a lot of attention, what also Alice mentioned. And if you think this is difficult, wait until you hear more, because the real challenge then is really the digital thread. And let me click. Oh yeah, actually Tanya wanted me to show you this slide, but it is a lot of, it's very granular, and I decided to show you this slide instead, which is a very simplified version of a supply chain, and might be easier to understand on how we're doing it. So the real challenge, as I said, is then the digital thread, and the digital thread is shown here, like as the red line going up and down as a connection to all the supply chain participants. So you heard me earlier saying that the state of the material changes, and we are doing what we are doing is trying to understand each transformation step at each supply chain station to be then able to code the chemistry. And our CEO always uses this analogy of a cake, and I think it's perfect because it makes you understand why it is so important to sort of understand the recipe. And so you know how much flour you need, you know how much eggs you need, some sugar, and in Germany you use a tiny bit of salt. I don't know how that is in the UK, but that whole defined mixing process then goes into an oven for a defined period of time. So all this is the information you need in order to create a specific cake. And you know, if one of these rules has been broken, that not the same cake can actually exit the process. So, and this is all not too dissimilar from a chemical transformation process that may happen at the smelter or at the refiner. So you know how much material goes in, you know how much process steps have to follow between goods in and goods out, and you know what the elapsed time should be. And if any of those rules are broken, again, you know that this is not what has been defined before, and this is what we call anomalies in our system, which you can see here on the slide, those imbalances. So used 2 eggs instead of 3 eggs, for example, or used 2 kilos of 20 kilos of cobalt instead of 30. And so clearly you need to follow the material, but the materials are fundamentally changing. And when you go a little bit further into the supply chain, you have component manufacturers, such as a battery cell manufacturer, for example, who has a defined process between goods in and goods out. And we are taking scan points along the way from their production management system to be able to connect the specific material which enters, so adds goods in, and then the specific product which adds goods out. And this is how traceability is being applied, and sort of like an end-to-end view is being achieved. And so I told you that the blockchain is being used, and this is what you see, like the lower green line is then the blockchain or the data storage of what we're collecting on the way. And mass balance is mainly being used at all the steps where the material changes state. So this is the little how do you say, so where you see the icon of the weighing, so the mass balancing. And even if sometimes the mass balancing is not even enough, we go one step further and even look at the separation of the material at each production site. So for example, only on Mondays, you are able to produce on this conveyor belt the material we are tracing, for example, for Volvo. And how does the blockchain fit into this? And you asked me to go into a little bit more of the detail. I think it is quite important to apply blockchain in supply chains where there are really like huge asymmetries between the upstream and the downstream parts in terms of size of access, sophistications, and other measures. And whenever you see this asymmetry, I think it's a really good use case for distributed ledger technology to create trust in a network of actors who do not necessarily know each other, who do not necessarily want to know each other, and definitely not trust each other. And in these sort of like circumstances where fraud and misrepresentation is the core of the problem, we are trying to solve this by applying blockchain technology. I saw earlier on that there was a question being asked which blockchain technology we are using. We are using Hyperledger Fabric just because it has been proven itself as the enterprise blockchain, permission-based, private and permission-based. Obviously, when we're talking about supply chain transparency, we're not asking anyone to make their information or their data public. It's really more about like data management system, the blockchain, which gives specific access and reading or writing access to all the participants, however you want to handle your supply chain. So I think at this point it might be good to stop here, just because we have been talking a lot already, and there have been some questions, and maybe it's a good point to stop here and hopefully answer some questions.
Yeah, sure, Luise. Thank you very much. There are lots of questions. You did answer one. There was a question about what blockchain do you use. You did say you use Hyperledger Fabric. I wonder, I have a question related to that. Is that an expensive solution? Did you consider others as well?
In terms of a blockchain?
Yes.
I mean, it is our decision to use Hyperledger Fabric for several reasons. We are, though, believing highly in interoperability, and we know that we won't be the only solution out there in 5 or 10 years, and there won't be like one blockchain everybody agree to or one platform everybody will use. So we are getting ready for this sort of like future scenario in order to put a lot of effort into interoperability. So using cross chains to connect to other blockchains, but also other technical connection points to databases.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Do you want me to pick questions for you, or are you happy to do it yourself?
No, please, because I completely lost the overview. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, one of the latest questions comes from Paul Rankin from VSA. How does SaaS for blockchain make it revenue? don't know what SaaS do.
That's a software as a service.
Right. Okay.
So Paul, understood it right. We're using a software as a service solution. How do we make revenue? Well, we have usually we have sort of like a initial project fee, which, because as we need to understand the process of all of our customers, so it's like how do you say, like to install the process, and then there's annual revenue, so an annual fee in order to be part of that platform, to have a look into your data, which is not only a list of a data record, but also and we are analyzing also the data and give our customers the opportunity to report on what they see on our platform. I hope that answers the questions. Please, if not, write again, Paul.
All right. One question that I have, but I think somebody else asked also. You said that you have you track the ingredients like in a cake, some sort of a chemical signature. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, not like in a cake. I think that the baking, the cake analogy is so important, is because we need to understand what, not only in terms of amount, what goes into a cake, but also when you do what, like sort of like in the beginning, you put the things together and a specific amount of things. So, yeah, I mean, Alice, please jump in if you want to contribute.
And it's really important for us to understand the volumes entering the system, because we use a lot of mass balance and reconciliation to make sure that material from unknown provenance isn't entering our system. So yeah, the cake analogy is great, and we use it a lot. So thanks, Doug, for that.
And it's also Christmas time. So.
Yeah, Christmas time as well. So everyone loves cake. But yeah, no, we understand and we work really closely to understand how much material goes in, any ratios that might be used throughout the entire process, so we can really make those traceability connections along the length of the supply chain.
Okay, great. So we have a very long question, so long I can't even read it.
Well, if we have long questions as well, we can always take them and reply to them.
Yeah, just for everybody's benefit, the whole session is being recorded and will be available online. Yeah. Okay, here. How do you get all the suppliers in the company supply chains on board? How do you incentivize smaller suppliers, refiners?
Yeah, so Carolyn?
Lisa, no, sorry. Please, Alice, go and I'll add if there's something to add.
So when we interact with, supply chain actors, wherever they might sit, people might think you might come up against quite a lot of resistance. And that would be an unfair comment to make, because in my experience, supply chain actors from either end of the supply chain are keen to participate. They're keen to make sure that their material is, good material and not being mixed with the bad guys. And, I've seen a few comments within the chat. Those bad guys are certainly not artisanal miners, and there has been some quite strong opinion going on. But yeah, supply chain actors along the length of the supply chain are keen to participate in this in projects with us and to differentiate their material.
Okay. Do you want to add something, Luise?
No, I'm just really
okay. Great. Although the chat is going crazy, yeah. But I think the tracking carbon footprint is a good one to talk about.
Yeah, I think it is a good one. Actually, we didn't include it into our presentation just because there was already so much to talk about. The proof of provenance and sort of like the ESG traceability we are doing. So once we establish traceability in a supply chain, right, on the basis of the flow of the material, we can then attach information at each step of the supply chain, whatever is sort of like needed. This could be like fairness certificates, sustainability certificates. It could be an information about if the supply chain participant is using renewable energy, for example, but also the intensity of each step of the supply chain participant. So we are sort of, by having an overview, an end-to-end view over a supply chain, we are building like a scope 3 assessment from the ground up. So always collecting scope 1 and scope 2 data on each step of the supply chain, and then obviously also collaborating with life cycle assessment data. We then, it's almost like a, you know, like the Russian dolls, the babushkas, you know, it's like a snowball who grows bigger. So at the end, the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, gets a very clear and precise measurement of how much CO2 they inherited, as well as all the other supply chain participants. And yeah, I hope that at least describes it a little bit.
All right. Okay. We know now that Germans put salt in the cake, but something you will learn today, Luise, that they're not called babushkas, they're called batryoshkas. Anyway, well, really, our time is up, and I think it will be unfair to keep chatting when people didn't plan to hear. It was a great session, great attendance. So let's keep talking. We'll be happy to have you ladies back. So thank you very much for your time, and let's keep learning together about blockchain and mining, and let's make it happen.
Absolutely, so, and I just put it also in the chat that there have been a lot of questions not answered. Please reach out. There's the email address lmh@circulor.com, and we are happy to jump on calls, even if it's just 5 minutes to answer your questions. We are very happy about them reaching us. So
I will just put out this slide again because if you sign up to Blockchain in Mining, you will see when the presentation will be online. So you can, review the presentation again. The contacts, of course, also will be there. So yeah, we invite you to join us on our journey. So thank you very much to everybody, and thank you to Circulor for great presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Fantastic work.
Thank you, Tanya, for the opportunity, and yeah, Merry Christmas to all of you.
We're not able to answer on the day, so I will read out the questions, and Luise will answer them. So the question number 1 is, how does software as a service for blockchain make its revenue?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a question we hear a lot. So basically, we have a value-based pricing system. That means the more value you gain out of our solution and the platform, the more you pay. So for example, the OEM, which is really on the downstream part of the supply chain, gets the most value out of our information and supply chain transparency we are providing. So the OEM pays the most, and then it goes price down until we arrive at the mine. And artisanal miners, for example, they can join our platform for free. And then to go just a little bit more into detail about our revenue. So we split the fees into 2, let's say, types. The first type is sort of like a project fee, setup fee, which is in the beginning of our collaborations with our existing clients. And then we ask every supply chain participant, then value-based for an annual fee in order to use the platform.
Okay,
I hope that answers the question.
And OEM is?
Oh, sorry, original equipment manufacturer. So this would be in our case, Volvo and Daimler, and yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you. So the upstream guys, yeah.
Yeah, the downstream guys.
Downstream
so
guys.
It is, so it's the other.
Downstream. Yeah. We are the upstream. The miners upstream. They're downstream.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
Exactly.
Okay. Now I have a question from Holly. How do you get all the suppliers in these companies' supply chains on board? How do you incentivize the smaller suppliers, refiners, who may not see the value in tracing their supply chain?
Yeah, also a very good question. I think talking from our experience with our existing clients, we never had the problem of needing to convince them. So obviously the original equipment manufacturers, such as the big corporate companies, they know of the value, but the better sponsorship we get from our clients, such as Volvo, for example, the more easy it is for us to onboard their supply chain participants. So, for example, Volvo now requires all of their supply chain participants to provide traceability. So obviously, if it's a requirement, that's enough incentivization in order to get the contract, for example, with Volvo. And now we see more and more that also more on the upstream part, so more on the part of the mines, and also from the governmental point of view, there's a lot of interest in proving that they provide responsible sourcing, and therefore can maybe also claim another price for the resource. So for example, once you prove that you're use certified resources, you can ask for a higher price, and then not only asking for a higher price, but also get use it as like a key differentiator for your competitors. Okay. So there's never really been a case where we said like where we had to convince anyone, because I think everybody in the supply chain are currently having those conversations around sustainability and around ethical commitment in the supply chain.
Great. And the last question, could you elaborate on the workflow for tracing carbon footprint, for example, for electric vehicle?
Yeah. Once we establish traceability within a supply chain, so once we can track and trace a resource on its journey throughout the whole value chain, we can then attach information to it. This information, for example, could be certification about fairness, about sustainability, about quality, but it could be also information, for example, in regards to CO2 intensity. So on the one hand, which sort of energy are you using? Is it renewable? Is it non-renewable? And then also the concrete measurements of each actor within the supply chain. So what we're doing is by tracing CO2, we can show it dynamically on our platform in real time per supplier, per day or per week or per month, however you want to handle it, and then not only see the CO2 intensity of those participants, but also what kind of CO2. So as I said, renewable, non-renewable, for example. So what we are basically doing is by collecting in each step CO2 intensity on the back of the resources and traceability, we build up sort of like a scope 3 assessment from the ground up, which at the moment is Daimler, for example, using our platform in order to do that.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much. It was a great session, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from Circulor again.
Thank you, Tanya. Bye-bye.